As Barbara said, I'm Kevin Matthews, co-founder of the Akhal-Teke Foundation. Um, I want to thank the supporters of the Akhal-Teke Foundation who make everything we do possible. I want to thank the Equine Collaborative International for this lovely series on these breeds. And I want to thank everyone who's watching now and on the recordings for your interest in the Akhal-Teke breed. Tonight, I'm going to talk about recovering a legendary breed, the Akhal-Teke horse. So what is an Akhal-Teke? Well, it's a line of horses that go back 4 millennia and more to the very dawn of horse domestication. Naturally athletic, supremely graceful. If you Google world's most beautiful horse, you'll get lots of Akhal-Tekes in the lists that come up. But scientifically, the Akhal-Teke is considered a primitive breed because it does go back in straight lines to Central Asia and the origin of people and horses having the kind of relationships that have continued. It's as such an incredibly ancient horse, and as a outlier in terms of its conformation and personality, it's a vital reservoir of genetic diversity for the entire species of Equus caballus. So the characteristics of an Akhal-Teke include a refined head, a large, powerful jaw, but a small muzzle, giving them typically a triangular head with a straight or Roman nose, large, expressive eyes, sometimes hooded, a long, upright neck, prominent withers with a long back, long, slender legs with hard, round hooves and a sparse mane and tail. The faces often have so little fur on them that they're almost leather-like. It's called a dry face. Um, so they're really built like greyhounds of the horse world. In terms of personality, they're sensitive, intelligent, passionate. When we have visitors to the farm, I like to explain to people that the Akhal-Tekes are coming up to the fence to talk to everybody, running from across the pasture because their personality is somewhere halfway between a quarter horse and a golden retriever. As natural athletes, they have some chops to prove it. The Russian black stallion Absent won the Olympic gold in dressage in the 1960 Olympics. That horse went on to medal in 2 more Olympics, including with another rider. It's one of the great Olympic performances for a horse ever. Um, More recently, in 1996 and 2000, the Akhal-Tekes Sengar and Kandar were long listed for the U.S. Olympic team in eventing. They were both out of Shenandoah Farm. Adamek, who we see here in the picture, um, and Gadasp and Gerald are all 3 stallions who have competed at FEI levels of dressage in the U.S. and Canada in recent years. And as versatile athletes, they excel at endurance racing. They do oval track racing like thoroughbreds on thoroughbreds, same tracks as thoroughbreds in Russia and Turkmenistan. They're great jumpers. They've done over 7 feet in the Poissons jump. They're nimble enough for polo, precise enough for equitation, etc. They're wonderful partners. With that ancient heritage and being probably the most extreme of the hot-blooded athletic horses, um, they came before the Arabian, before the thoroughbred. They're the athletic foundation for most modern sport horse breeds. Um, and with the advent of Y chromosome sequencing, really over the last 10 years, it's been proven that all 3 of the founding stallions of the thoroughbred, um, the Byerly Turk, the Darley Arabian, the Godolphin Barb, or Arabian he's called, all 3 of them were actually Turkmen line stallions. Um, DNA research has also shown that the Lipizzaner even, which has 8 known founding sires, genetically, based on the Y chromosome, 6 of those founding sires were from Akhal-Teke sire lines. But the genetic markers come forward with all that information. They also go back in Central Asia, the same mitochondrial and Y chromosome markers we can find in archaeological samples thousands of years before horse domestication. So in that area of Central Asia, the horses have been there kind of all along as human cultures have come and gone in tremendous sequence. Um, Over time, as Scythian, Nisaean, Parthian, Fergana, Carmen, Turanian, the golden horses in different languages, Argamax and Turkoman horses, which is the widest used name before they became known as Akhal-Tekes. Um, the Scythians were a horse people in Central Asia, kind of the original nomads and a really amazing culture. They were the beginning of the Iron Age. So the horses had already been domesticated in the Bronze Age and been around, but at the beginning of the Iron Age, they were um, they had nomadic horse cultures using these horses. Um, we have written records starting with the Roman historian Herodotus in 450 BC. In the Hindu Rig Veda, they talk about these horses. And the Chinese emperors, starting around 100 BC, wanted to get the Turkoman Akhal-Teke horses from the Fergana Valley, which is to the west of China. They waged the War of Heavenly Horses over a series of years and finally got themselves some Akhal-Tekes. That became the start of the Silk Road. Let's see. Um, the Scythians had a tradition of horse jewelry that we know from their burials. And this is a museum piece, the kinds of things that they put on their horses, possibly when they were alive and riding and living and fighting with their horses, certainly in the burials. And it's really fascinating that tradition of horse jewelry has persisted until today, that Akhal-Tekes have this pretty unique but universal in that Akhal-Teke culture going back to Turkmenistan tradition of horse adornment. So here's a map of Central Asia to help us get oriented because, people in North America don't tend to have a great sense of Asian geography. Turkmenistan in the middle of the map there is mostly desert with oases along the rivers, and the Caspian Sea is on the left of Turkmenistan and the Black Sea to the left of that, Afghanistan to the south, Kazakhstan, and then Russia to the north. Where you see Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, those mountains separate China from the Central Asian steppes where horses were domesticated. So the Scythians, the people before them that are unnamed, and the people continuing after them roamed these steppes all across this map with these horses. Um, Once the Silk Road was started around 1000 BC, the nomads took up raiding um, along that route. And this is a map that shows some of the main Silk Roads. If you look where it says Persia, and then you look above that, it says Merv. Merv is kind of in the center of what's now Turkmenistan, and it was a major junction and oasis, on the Silk Road, and it became a center of learning with over a dozen libraries and hundreds of thousands of people. And it was one of the biggest cities in Asia um, up until the time when Genghis Khan came through and sacked the city in 1221 and massacred most of the people there and probably a lot of the horses. Um, that was the heyday of the Oghuz Turks. After that, the empire weight of empire shifted further west to Persia, when the Ottomans, where you can see it says Turkey on the far left, the Ottomans mostly west of the Caspian, um, became mediators between the Central Asian horse culture and Europe. And a highlight of that mediation occurred in 1686 when the wars back and forth between the Western Europeans and the Ottomans led to the sacking of conquest of Budapest by the Western Europeans. And the end of that battle, the British acquired the Byerly Turk, who was the first of the thoroughbred founders. So he went to England and bred with local English mares and an assortment of other mares, and with the other founders started that fastest racehorse that we have today. Um, Also, um, at the Ottoman Empire was waning toward getting toward World War I. So during the 19th century, the there was a battle of empires between Russia to the north and the British from the south, coming from India up into Turkmenistan, into Afghanistan. And the Russians eventually made it into Turkmenistan, um, and took them multiple armies to beat the nomadic Turkmen because of the quality of the Turkmen horses, among other things. But eventually in 1881, at the Battle of Göktepe, the Russians with modern military equipment um, conquered the Teke tribe of Turkmens. And again, there was a big massacre. And the Russians took the Akhal-Teke kind of as spoils of empire, started breeding them in their military cavalry stables and organizing that breeding, incorporating them into Russian breeds. The Russian colonel started the Akhal-Teke stud book that had been kept as an oral tradition. They started the written stud book in 1912. Um, then there was the Russian Revolution, and the Soviet Russia founded Turkmenistan in 1922, which is when the nomadic tribes of the Turkmen were really forced to settle and produce cotton quotas. A lot of horses that remained were lost during that period. There were famines, there was a lot of hardship. Um, the Russians kept kind of the Turkmen kept the horses themselves, sometimes having to hide them in the desert. The Russians kept breeding the Akhal-Tekes and prized them, and closed the stud book that we have today in 1932 with 287 stallions and 468 mares. It seems like a pretty small number, and I think it probably is, but it's interesting to compare the official stats of the Jockey Club with the thoroughbred are that we have three stallion founders who were these Turkoman Akhal-Teke horses and 74 mares. So 77 horses that founded the thoroughbred versus 755 horses that founded the modern Akhal-Teke as the closed breed continuation of the Turkoman from before. And that stud book is still held in Russia today. So that gets us to the North American period. In 1979, the first two Akhal-Tekes came to North America, imported by Phil and Margot Case, who were involved in international business and met them in Europe. Senator and Oliva were the first stallion and mare, and they became the cornerstone horses at Shenandoah Farm in Stanton, Virginia, which semi-coincidentally is only about 40 minutes north of where the Akhal-Teke Foundation is based today. In 1982, Phil and Margot brought together other people and started the Akhal-Teke Association of America, which is our breed association. Another cornerstone event was 1997. Tito and Natasha Pontecorvo brought 75 purebred Akhal-Tekes from their breeding operation in Russia and founded Akhal, Texas. So that's a major influence on the North American population. And in 2020, we founded the Akhal-Teke Foundation. Um, how rare are Akhal-Tekes? Well, there's about 100,000 thoroughbreds in North America. There's about 12,000 Lipizzaner. Um, there are 300 Akhal-Tekes, probably 3,500 to 5,000 worldwide. To get a better grip on that, consider that recent years, we've had about 10 foals per year born in North America. And as part of our breed recovery, census, and scientific work, we've got a preliminary estimate that probably 25 foals a year are necessary to maintain a basic breeding population with continuing genetic diversity and quality and replacing the population. So the current breeding in North America is not sustainable. So what can we do about it? Well, the Akhal-Teke Foundation was built to preserve this breed and continuing the legacy of Phil and Margot and incorporating horses from all the lines that have come to North America. We're focusing on the North American subpopulation. I'll explain a little more why in a minute. We're doing a breed census and working with multiple databases to collate and be able to do analysis on that data. We monitor and breed and advise according to coefficients of inbreeding to prevent loss of diversity through excess inbreeding. We're partnering with the Livestock Conservancy, and the census feeds into a herd book analysis, which is a term for a study of who's who in the breed and which horses are underrepresented, which horses are maybe overrepresented. The herd book analysis will feed into a demographic model of the population over time. And then we're on the verge of having access to S&P based genetic refinement that will take the statistical understandings of inbreeding that you get from with coefficients and the herd book analysis and actually make them more precise with actual individual diversity analyses. Why North America? Well, first of all, subpopulations are important for managing a rare breed over time. The breed can change, its genetic base can change, and that's called genetic drift. You can have selection drift when there's a fad or other focus that the certain qualities, typically phenotypic qualities, in some breeds it's been a color or a kind of a gait. The horses get bred for that specialty by selection, and you lose diversity of the horses that don't get picked for that. More insidious is random genetic drift. So when you have horses breeding in any population over time, some of the genes will randomly get lost. And if you have the whole population of the breed managed as one unit, when drift occurs and genes are lost through random drift, you have nowhere to go to get them back. However, if you manage a breed as several different subpopulations, those subpopulations by random drift will change differently. So another population will still have the genetics that the other population might have lost. So subpopulations are critical. We have some other reasons to look at the North American subpopulation besides just being here. First of all, we have a really clear knowledge of who the original import horses were. Of course, they're all since 1979. So that gives us a really clear baseline to do our analysis, which is kind of cutting edge. We can do it with a finite set of horses. Another more fundamental issue has to do with what happens to be the population genetics in North America. And that brings us to this graph. This is a dendrogram produced using microsatellite analysis by the Russian studbook scientists, 2017 or 2019. And if you look at this, the bottom line there is the genetic association of the horses in Turkmenistan. The next line up is the horses in America. Up in the top corner is Russia and CIS, the Russian associated countries. So what this diagram shows you is that the horses in America, because of who was imported when, because there hasn't been a lot of change, they are closest to the original horses from Turkmenistan. Other factors are that Turkmenistan is a closed country with a lot of politics, and there's a lot of questions about horse breeding there now. And Russia is also a dictatorship that has um, uncertain stability. So we feel like preserving the horses in North America is a critical step for the breed worldwide. Now, in terms of the demographics, which is the question of the population numbers, um, any breed manager looks at these same basic demographic challenges. First of all, we have an 11-month gestation period. So at best, you get one foal per mare per year. Second, a 50 or 60% annual fecundity rate is realistic. It's even 60% is on the optimistic side. That's if you're breeding 10 brood mares, if you get 6 of them actually pregnant and having a successful pregnancy, that would be a 60% annual fecundity rate. Um, we don't breed our mares until they're 5, so that they're 6 years old by the time they're carrying the weight um, of a foal and uterus and placenta and so on, the placenta and the foal. And so realistic is that the mare has 15 years of reproduction. They're not going to give us 15 foals. They'll give us maybe 5 to 10 foals. And then there's another hidden challenge. And I think this is true for most horse breeds, certainly the riding breeds. The horses are mostly bought and sold for riding. Most horse riders are not breeders. So most riding horses don't get bred. So if you have a model like breed associations sometimes have representing breeders, we're going to breed and sell horses. We're going to promote the breed and sell more horses. Well, if you're promoting the breed successfully, great. You're selling more horses to good homes, great. But 80% of those are going to be riding homes. So only 20% of the homes are going to breed those horses, and you're losing the population in terms of breed recovery. And I'm probably going a little too slow. So this chart here is just a snapshot of that. Mamuk is an original import stallion um, who who had 17 purebreds that we know of in North America, who in turn produced 35 purebreds. But as you go through this chart, toward the right, the black lines are horses who died without having offspring, or became gelded or aged out. And so you map through just a small number of generations, and then you have the green lines are the horses who are still potentially alive and breedable, and only a fraction of those are going to be bred. So this horse who has had dozens and dozens and dozens of offspring is only represented by a handful of breeding horses now. And that's an unusually prepotent stallion with an unusual amount of reproduction. So for less popular stallions who were bred less heavily, they're already almost disappearing one after another from the genetic pool. So working with the Livestock Conservancy, we're developing all the parts of a model recovery plan. It's the first one coming out of Livestock Conservancy. It's the first one at this technical level that we're aware of. So it may provide a model for other equine breeds that have a lot of similarities. Preliminary snapshot of that, addressing the riding horses not get bred problem by seeking nonprofit funding and retaining all the fillies in the conservation breeding program, as well as enough colts to maintain their genetics in the program. Breeding as heavily as the horses, you can do within horse welfare, and assuming that there are no financial limitations, just biologically, it's a 20-year program to get from 10 brood mares that we have now in the foundation to producing 25 foals per year. 15 to 20 years, kind of a generation's work. To pursue that work, in 2023, we moved across the country from Oregon with 17 horses to establish the national nonprofit Akhal-Teke Center on an 800-acre farm in Lexington, Virginia. Visitors are welcome. We'd love to show you around and have you meet the friendly horses and We're blessed to have the pastures and barns on this farm donated to us by Sally and Larry Mann. We are maintaining a frozen semen archive, which carries the archive it goes back to that senator, that first stallion imported to North America. We have his semen. We have the semen of Sengar, who's the top performing eventing Akhal-Teke, probably the top achieving Akhal-Teke in North America, up to some of the best current stallions. We're pursuing ongoing science with the Livestock Conservancy and other faculty around the country. We have programs to support other breeders because it's not about us doing it all ourselves. We're trying to take a buck stops here attitude toward it, but we provide stud services and scientific consulting to other breeders. We do public education like this talk tonight and our active social media sites. Partnerships and sponsorships for different causes are important to us. We depend on our grassroots donors and major donors. We're developing plan giving for the endowment that it will take for these horses to be protected in perpetuity. And with that ongoing public support, Akhal-Teke recovery is now underway. So thank you. Thank you to the supporters of the Akhal-Teke Foundation. You make this possible. Thank you to Equine Collaborative International for the series and the producing tonight. Thank you to the contributing photographers, Archer Babuev and Ellen Chappelle, who've given us a lot of these beautiful pictures. Thank you to everyone who loves the ancient, amazing, and endangered Akhal-Teke horses. I'm Kevin Matthews with the Akhal-Teke Foundation. Here's my phone number, my email address, and our website. Please feel free to call me or write me anytime. We have a lot more depth of information, references for some of these facts on the website. We have videos and lots of interaction on our social media.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm completely overwhelmed with the amount of information that you packed into a very, very short half hour. We do have a couple of questions if you care to address them before we move on. You actually already answered that one. How widespread are the horses in North America? Are they in little pockets or are they well distributed?
That's a little bit of both. There are quite a few. So the two biggest breeding operations are with the Akhal-Teke Foundation here in Lexington, Virginia, and in the San Juan Islands of Washington at Sweetwater Farm Akhal-Teke, the Amrita Eyebold. Those are the two biggest current ones. There are Akhal-Tekes being bred and trained and campaigned in Ontario, in Colorado, in Florida, in the Midwest. So they're pretty spread around, but of course there are a few pockets. It's not a huge number of breeders, probably fewer than a dozen active breeders at the moment. And if you're away from Virginia and you want to know where to see an Akhal-Teke in person, drop us a line and we'll match you up.
That's wonderful. Here's a long one. I'm going to read it to you. I've always heard, this is from Jacqueline. I've always heard a lot about the different stud lines, but finding information on mare lines has been challenging over the years. Is there a mare line in North America that you feel has been the most influential on the breeds in North American breeding?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, this situation with the stallion lines seems to go back to the Turkmen Akhal history, the Turkmen oral history, and then it's something that the Russians have really structured, the stallion lines. And of course, we know that the mares are at least as important to the individual horse as the stallion is. The mare is probably a little bit more than 50% important. I don't know of a structured set of mare lines. Um, and our the question comes up about particularly among Akhal-Teke breeders about are we going for quality or are we going for diversity? And our perspective on that is that maintaining diversity is fundamental to the future of the breed. It's a sine qua non, that without nothing, that without which nothing. If we don't maintain the diversity, we're not maintaining the future of the breed. We address the quality by choosing the horses that we mate to bring together their best characteristics. And so far, that's been really successful. I mean, you could just look at the filly in the picture here, Swan Alton Alma. You know, it's just a beautiful filly. Um, you can come see the horses and judge for yourself, but by trying to breed every horse who's not a defective horse and keep their genes in the pool, we not only make horses that are pretty and athletic, we try to maintain their fertility, which is based on invisible factors. We want to maintain their immune system quality, which is based on invisible factors, and so on. So the way, so the herd book analysis, and then later on the SNP DNA-based analysis, these are the foundational ways to go deeper than stallion lines or mare lines in understanding who to breed to maintain diversity and quality. At the bottom line about the question, um, I've heard a little bit of rumors about people thinking about defining mare lines, but I just haven't seen them defined yet. And we're kind of going past that to try to do the scientific level of breeding that those lines are kind of shortcuts, and we can do better by going deeper.
Let's take one more question and then we will switch to our next speakers, but I hope that you can hang around in case somebody comes up with more questions at the end.
Yes.
And that question, I just saw it. Where did it go? Oh my goodness. This is from Beth. Are you setting up an organizational project, RE looking at COI?
Yes. So part of we look at COIs as we breed. We try to keep our COIs uh, well under 5%. And even when we provide stud services, we require enough knowledge about the mare that we can do a COI calculation and not propagate inbred horses. Um, and the herd book analysis will incorporate COIs. And then down the road, the DNA-based SNP analysis will give us even more content on that. So, we're a nonprofit. We're just here to help the horses and join with other people who want to help the horses. So as we get the census of more pinned down, that information will be available free online. And as the herd book analysis comes together and gets written up, it's going to take a while, but I think that information will be open information because that's what we think is best for the horses over time, for all the people who care to learn about it along with us. It's a collaborative project, and I'll answer questions later. And if you don't have a chance then or now, like I said, give me a call, drop me an email anytime.